Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. If I could direct my question to Mr. McCaffrey. Earlier this year at a hearing of the Subcommittee on National Security and Foreign Affairs of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, you testified, and I quote, "Mr. Castro engaged me for a couple of hours on," and I'll continue quoting you, but I always find it intriguing that people are so proud of the number of hours that Castro spends with them. He spent 2 hours. No, he spent 3 hours with me, 4 hours, 5 hours. I guess it gives you some kind of bizarre street cred or badge of honor. Anyway, you say, "Mr. Castro engaged me for a couple of hours." Woo! And he wants his spies back from Florida. I remember telling him, I said, "Mr. Castro, I'm sure you're very proud of these men, and they are Cuban patriots. And you'll get them back eventually when we have normalized relations," end quote. I find it regrettable, Mr. McCaffrey, that you would refer to these Cuban spies who were convicted in our U.S. fair criminal justice system and whose cases were reheard again and whose convictions were once again reaffirmed as patriots, and that you focus on returning these spies to the Cuban regime, yet you do not mention cop killers like Joanne Chesimard and other fugitives of U.S. law and U.S. justice who were given refuge by the Cuban regime. Also in your testimony from April of this year, you noted, and I quote, "There is no question that there are lots of drugs floating around Cuba, and particularly washing up on shore. You know, bundles of cocaine and marijuana. But it was clear to me that they were not on a government basis, but part of an international conspiracy to threaten the regime and to threaten their sense of communist morality." Communist morality? Given the brutal repressive apparatus of the regime that rules Cuba, totalitarian dictatorship, exerting absolute control over the island and its people, you really think that Fidel and Raul and the regime elite are not aware of drug trade in and out of the island, and do not facilitate or sponsor such activities? And also in your testimony before the Government Reform Subcommittee, you said, and I quote, "I'd bring some of them," meaning Cuban officials, "in our schooling system. I'd get 2 of them to go to Leavenworth. You know, the first 5 years they'd all be intel people, but eventually they'd get jealous and some of the commerce would get the slot. So dialogue, engagement on areas of mutual interest, that will work." Now, in light of the significant threat posed to our nation and our interests by Cuban espionage, and in light of the recent massacre at Fort Hood, where all of these signals and all of these signs were completely overlooked, how can you have no problem with opening the doors of Leavenworth and our training programs to Cuban intelligence agents who are declared enemies of the United States? I find that shameful, sir.
Well, let me first of all correct you. My title is General. After 32 years of military service,
I apologize.
wounded in action 3 times, I'm offended by your deliberate marginalization of my viewpoints. And let me go on to say that it is clear.
I was quoting you, sir.
It is clear.
Are those not quotes, sir? Are those quotes, yes or no?
I am offended by your language.
You're offended by your quotes?
Now, let me go on to continue to respond.
What part of your quotes offend you? Your quotes offend you.
Are you going to let me answer, or are you going to...
I have my 5 minutes. I can do with my 5 minutes what I wish,
your
General. So go ahead. I want to know, are you offended by your quotes? I was quoting you.
Well, if you're asking me if I think the Cubans are a national security threat to the United States, my answer is, if you ask for the top 20 national security threats, they wouldn't be among them. Now, my actual viewpoint, however, is that U.S. national interests will be better served by lifting the travel ban, by engaging in diplomatic contact with them, and indeed
I think
by
my
lifting the economic
questions
ban
were asking you
policy.
whether you do not feel that our security would be at any risk by your quotes saying that you would invite these officials to come into our facilities.
Oh, this is silly.
That is
hope
quotes.
your
You're
argument,
offended
to
by
be
your
honest,
quotes?
is it doesn't apply to the realities. What I support is people-to-people engagement, diplomatic
Read from your quotes,
engagement,
sir.
economic engagement. Those are the
The
policies I endorse.
the time of the
That's the
gentlelady
facts.
has expired, and the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Delahunt, is recognized.
Yeah, General McCaffrey, I want to go on the record and say that I consider you a great American patriot. But let's talk about our national security. Are you familiar with Admiral Jim Loy?
Sure. Yeah. A
He-
former commandant of the Coast Guard.
All right. Are you familiar with General Jim Thomas Hill?
Yeah, the former commander of U.S. Southern Command.
And that includes, I take it, the island of, the jurisdiction would include.
Sure, the Caribbean region.
Caribbean.
In this.
Are you familiar with General Jack Sheehan?
Sure, four-star Marine, very patriotic
And highly decorated,
veteran. Right.
another patriot.
All right.
Are you familiar with Lieutenant Robert Gard?
Lieutenant General Bob Gard. Yeah.
Okay. Lieutenant General John Costello?
I know him by reputation. I don't know him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brigadier General John Adams?
I only know him by reputation.
Okay. And I know that you know General Charles Wilhelm.
Oh yeah, very fine. Four-star Marine, retired, and a former Southcom commander, I might add.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read, this was not a letter that was signed. It's now, I understand, in the record. But I want to read excerpts from this letter because it goes to the issue of national security, American national security. And this is the letter that these men signed, these American patriots that have fought for this country. U.S. policy towards Cuba has not only failed in its principal objective of ending Cuba's communist system, but has harmed our interests across the board. Most important, it works against our national security interests. In our judgment, the committee would advance the best interests of the United States by acting favorably on H.R. 874, the Freedom to Travel Act. Do you concur with the conclusion